Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. We are doing our next video in our faction focus for the game of BLKOUT today. And we are going to be looking at the big, bad, muscled up boys of the Manticor Borz Group today. This is gonna be a fun one, so go ahead and buckle up and let's jump straight into the background. Manticor Borz Group is the military right arm of the Chechnyan Russian group Chimera. Russia was one of the major superpowers along with the UN, the US, and the BLKOUT in sending out research vessels to Able, as well as putting together their own fleet to land on Able in 2070 in the first wave. Now, whenever they all got to Able, Russia violated the LEAP Act that all the different countries and organizations had signed and attacked the other vessels there. In particular, they attacked the Hope vessel that was supposed to land on Able. There's supposed to be this 2-year buffer of them landing before the national parties got to land as well, to kind of create infrastructure was what it was supposed to be. But the Russian vessels fired on the other contingents. Ended up that they weren't a match for the combined might of the UN and the BLKOUT, as they were largely destroyed. But some of their fleet, a few of their ships, were able to escape, and they got around behind the moons of Able, and that ends up being where they've set up base. Now, as far as I can tell, there's not great information as to whether they're set up on the moon, as to whether they're just in orbit by the moons and they're kind of this in space, or whether they're landed on the moons and somehow using that as a base of operation. But this is where Manticor kind of puts its roots and it comes out of. It's described as being this muscled spider that hangs over Able. Ibrahim, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a private security sector force of the BLKOUT. At one point, and I don't think we have it directly in the timeline, but at some point in the timeline, Ibrahim has a civil war between its different counterinsurgency factions, and they go to war with one another. Now, one of these splinters off, one of these factions, which happens to be a rather religious faction. They believe religiously in the synthesization of gene enhancement as well as technology. They're trying to reach the peak of human development, or human evolution, if you will. One of these splinter forces heads off and actually finds a home with Manticor, where they are welcomed with open arms. And this is a major boon for Manticor in building up their elite forces, because Manticor already had a high-level technology, was using a lot of heavy weapons, things of that nature, but they was added to by the gene enhancement technology that this Ibrahim faction, splinter if you will, brought with them. During the kill wager, Manticor used a lot of their people. They did a lot of different operations, and the reason for this was they were using it as a training operation, as a training ground if you will, for them to develop high-level, well-trained and experienced operatives, especially out of their veteran Borz group. Now, they did this so that in 2103, they would be prepared when they launched an assault on Fort Hope. That's kind of where we sit now, with Borz Group as part of Manticor has finally come down from their moon, has entered into action. They're an elite force. They're a dangerous force. They have done a lot with gene enhancement to make their soldiers even stronger than they naturally would, but then they've married that with technology to create these super soldiers, if you will. But they're super soldiers in a very different way than, say, the UN Raid Alpha Force super soldiers. So that's where we sit today with Manticor. Let's go ahead and look at the force breakdown of each of the different units that we get out of this Manticor Borz Group. So Manticor Borz Group force is broken up into 3 separate units. They're all extremely varied in what they do and what they bring to the table and how you really play them. Unit number 1 is the Psychic team. Now, this is kind of the stereotypical Manticore unit. It's a squad of only 1. It's just 1 single guy, but he is absolutely souped up. His stat line isn't necessarily crazy. He's got a skill of 6, which is pretty much average. He's got a movement of 4, which quite honestly is slow, if not average. What makes it slower is there really aren't any movement abilities within Manticore like there are in Harlow, that they look slow, but they move fast because of a lot of their abilities. But what really makes it stand out is he has an armor of 2d10. What that means is he gets to roll 2 armor checks for the damage that's done to him, and he needs a 4 to pass. That is really strong armor. But on top of the durability of that armor, it actually comes with 2 hit points as well, or 2 damage track as it's called in the game, meaning that you've got to basically create 2 damage on him in order to take the unit out. And that is incredibly hard when you combine it with the fact that his armor is some of the best in the entire game. Another thing that makes this unit really special and stand out is the fact that it comes locked and loaded with 2 separate weapon profiles. It can use the SYY-1 machine gun, which has a 24-inch range, so that's really good. And it comes with doing a single point of damage, which doesn't seem great, but it adds to that by having heavy and having cyclic, which means that if it stands still, you get +1 a shot from heavy, and you can make a second shooting action right after your first one with cyclic, or you can even ready your guy up, preparing him for Overwatch, or if you've left him in the open, giving him cover, meaning he is incredibly hard to move because he can stand in the open, get cover from that extra ready action, and then you still have to somehow get through his armor. That's incredibly powerful. His second gun is actually a grenade launcher. It's got same range of 24 inches, but instead it does damage 2, meaning it can do some damage to vehicles or to things that are armored. That's really helpful, and it has a blast radius of 1 inch, meaning it can hit multiple enemies if they group up. It can do blast damage, which gets through armor, which gets, helps to take down vehicles, things of that nature. He can do a lot. This is a very powerful unit that can lay down a lot of firepower. It is incredibly hard to move. Obviously, there's the downside of only 1 model, but this 1 model almost plays like a handler in his stat line, in his hit points, things of that nature. So definitely a threat, even though it's a really small unit. The second unit we have for Manticor Borz Group is BLKOUT team. It's a 4-man squad. It comes with 2 grunts, it comes with 2 specialists, and it comes with 2 accesses to the armory, which is nice to have. Now, it has the exact same stat line as the first 2 with a skill of 6, and it has a movement of 4, average to below average, nothing special there. For armor, it has an armor of 4 and gets to roll 1d10. Now that's big. Armor of 4 is really, really good. Best in the game, right? And that's kind of what Manticore does. So that's really nice. But when we start to look at the unit as a whole, some of their kit really helps this unit stand out. They come with the gun that both BLKOUT and Insertion Team have default. It's the AKMZ-2. Now it's got a range of 24, good long range, which this team needs, right? This long range is so nice to have for Manticore because they don't have the movement to really close easily. But on top of that, it has the medium keyword, meaning that it can re-roll 1 failed shot every single time it shoots. This kind of helps to mitigate the fact that their skill level is average because you get that extra shot in there to hopefully land some kills with it. It's damage 1, which is pretty much what you get for your standard default unit guns. For the specialist one, you get a data spike. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. It's a data spike. They're very useful because they obviously E-war and being able to do what all data spikes do, but that's it. That's what he does. Very key when it comes to scoring scenarios that require you to have data spikes, things like that. Specialist number 2 is armed with the HMG, which has a range of between 4 and 24 inches. Honestly, that under 4 inches doesn't make a really big difference. That's such a small range for people to close into. At that point, just go into close quarters combat and fight them that way. It does damage 2 and then sustain 2. So it's really, really good at taking out things, even that have high armor, but really focusing down a single unit or a single model, something like that, because sustain 2 means that they have to re-roll 2 of their successful armor dices. That gives you a lot of chances of getting damage through. Damage 2 means that you do have the option of shooting vehicles, you have the option of shooting dusters, and creating some extra damage too. So it's kind of a versatile weapon in that it can really do damage to both individual models, single personnel, and then can do damage to bigger things like vehicles or dusters and things like that. Now, the minus to this gun is that it has the deployed keyword, which means it cannot be shot if the unit has moved. That's a big downside, kind of, because really, if you look at it, Brat-Vatim it's not super mobile. All of Manticor is pretty immobile, so it's not the worst thing to go, listen, I'm not gonna bother redeploying, gonna keep him kind of where he is. It makes him a little bit less mobile than even the other guys, but it's not a big deal, especially considering that the final keyword for the unit, for this model, is shield, which means that this model, along with one model in base-to-base contact with it, gain cover. It's huge because you can just literally stick them in the open, put another model up against it, and they are in cover just like they were behind a building or just like they were leaning out. And that makes a massive difference because it allows you to fight in the open more. You've got high armor, right? And we're gonna talk about some of their battle drills and stuff like that that make you even harder to kill. And so this unit can really be played as kind of your frontline unit moving forward. Even if you can't use the gun, you still have shield, which is so incredibly valuable. This unit also comes with a big special rule, and that special rule is that it gives Manticor +1 D10 it gets to roll when rolling for initiative. So at the beginning of every turn, instead of just rolling 1 dice, you get to roll 2, and you don't have to use a control point to do it. So that's key in you kind of getting the first guy to go. You kind of get to set the tone for every single turn, and that's really nice to have, especially for a team. You don't move super fast, so having that first move to kind of set things up and create a little bit of board control. It's hard to get a lot of board control with Borz Group, but we're going to talk about some things you can do strategy-wise to do that. But that special rule makes this unit just a little bit better and have a little bit more depth to it that makes it important. The third and final unit for Manticor Borz Group is the insertion team. It's a 4-man squad, 2 grunts, 2 specialists, has 2 access points to the armory. This is the most versatile unit in this army because the other ones really aren't. They kind of do one thing and they do it really well. This unit gives you a little bit more. Same stat line as the Brat-Vatim. Skill 6, movement 4. They roll a single armor dice needing a 4, right? That's a pretty decent armor. That's just the average stat line outside of that. They have the same default weapon with the AK MZ2, 24 inches, medium. That's nice. It offsets their skill issues a little bit. So nothing super special there. Now, the versatility comes from the fact that their grunts get 2 accesses to the armory. That's really nice to have because there's some good weapons within the Manticor Borz Group armory that can give them a little bit extra punch, which is kind of what this force lacks. They're super heavy on defense, they lack mobility, and they lack a lot of firepower, to be quite honest. Now, you got 2 specialists in this. Specialist number 1 is your machine gunner. He adds the heavy and he adds the cyclic to the base AK MZ2, giving it a little bit more firepower, giving him a little bit more opportunity to do some damage, to land out some shots. Nothing crazy, but it's really nice to have. The second specialist is the Sidewinder. Now, he has the ability to pin down the enemy if he can pass a skill check. This is actually really, really big because it's got a short range, 12 inches, but it can keep your enemy from repositioning and moving in their next turn. This keeps an enemy out in the open, allowing for another one of your units to come in and finish them off. This doesn't give mobility to your army, but it helps mitigate some of your opponent's ability to be mobile and outmaneuver you, which pretty much everyone can outmaneuver Manticor. It's a very, very useful unit to have to kind of team up with your other units, pin another unit down, keep them where they are, and then you move in on them. When we're talking play style for Manticor Borz Group, it probably has the most straightforward and simple play style of any force in the entire game. The calling card for this army is defense. Doesn't do a lot of other things well at all. It's got zero mobility, it has no vertical mobility. It has zero ability to move to higher ground or anything like that. It wants to fight on the ground level. It doesn't have a whole lot of firepower. It really, really doesn't. And we're gonna look at that some more. And so there's really a couple of ways you want to play it. And you're really deciding if you wanna be really aggressive or if you would rather be a little bit more passive in your play style. And they're gonna play very straightforward. That's not a bad thing, but it's just kind of what you have to realize when you're piloting this army. Now let's go ahead and let's look at the force rule, the battle drills, and the armoring, and what those add and how you can use those. Now the force rule is super powerful. It actually means that when blast damage is done to these guys, you take away 1d10. The first d10 of blast damage done is negated. The best way to get through armor, which is what these guys have, is with blast damage. And all of a sudden, that gets mitigated. That makes these guys a lot tougher and a lot harder to move, which is huge. Now, when it comes to battle drills, these ones are not bad, but I wouldn't say that they're very critical to being able to win with Manticor Borz Group, which means if you want to use a control point or two to guarantee you get the next activation, especially if, say, you get off Sidewinder, you've got an enemy pinned and you're like, I want the next activation to get in there and finish them, use it, because you really don't need to save it too much for these battle drills. The first battle drill we have is linked, and what this does is a model in a unit that takes a ready action is able to then give their ready action to someone else in the unit who has already performed an action. This is good. It's not great because the reality is you're just handing off a ready action. It's good if you've got somebody in the open and you want to give them a ready action for cover, or it's good if, say, you want to give them a second chance, like a chance to kind of have a firing lane and provide overwatch, something like that. But the reality is this needs to be used early in the turn, because if it's not, the chances of you being able to react to your opponent's movements, react to your opponent's actions, you can just be wasting the control point. This needs to be used early and really think about how you're going to use it, because your opponent can completely ignore this and you've wasted the control point. So it's one thing that you do have to think pretty tactically about. Targeting smoke is the second battle drill, and it allows you to place a smoke token within 6 inches of any model in this unit. Now the key to this one and what makes it so good is that the unit placing the smoke token gets to ignore the smoke. This is really good for getting rid of line of sight to your opponents, but you can still shoot at them, or you go ahead and you get cover, but they don't get cover from it. This could be really useful. Once again, it adds to the survivability of Manticor Borz Group, but to be honest, your guys are already so tough. This one may not be useful a lot. You can use your control points in a lot of other ways. This isn't bad, but I would say this is kind of middle ground because you don't have the movement to really take advantage of it, and your firepower is kind of lackluster already. So this is not going to open up a bunch of huge things. It just makes you a little bit more survivable and ups your damage output over your opponent by a little bit. The final battle drill is actually, I think, what is the absolute best because it's built for Manticor, and that is Thorax Shields. This gives your unit +1 D10 on armor checks. Their armor is already incredible, and this makes it so hard to get through. This can absolutely aggravate an opponent where you put your guys out in the open, maybe you have ready tokens, so you give them cover, and you throw Thorax Shields on them, and all of a sudden your opponent just is going to have a terrible time trying to move these guys. This is brutal. This is the one that I would absolutely go, you need to be using this, because this keeps your guys up and standing and really causes your opponent to have to do a ton of damage in order to take down anyone in your force. So with the battle drills done, we've looked at those, we've looked at the force rule. Let's go ahead and look at the armory. And what does Manticor Borz Group have to offer when it comes to our armory? If I'm being honest, I think the Manticor Borz Group armory is a little bit lackluster. I don't think it's super great. It's probably my least favorite in the game, if I'm just being really blunt and really honest about it. It's got a couple okay things. You got the air bursting rifle, range of 24, and seeker, which means opponent doesn't get cover. My only problem with this is seeker, so you get your 3 shots because your opponent doesn't get cover, is really, really similar to medium, because medium you get to re-roll a failed shot. Not a huge difference from your base gun. So I don't hate it, I like seeker, but not having any other keywords, it's not a huge improvement over what we already have in the default weapon for pretty much every unit in our team, or in our force. The next one is the RPG-33, and it's built to take out vehicles and dusters in a single shot. It's good. I really like it. You've got strip grenades, which will tear apart infantry, really built to take out groups because of its blast radius and things like that. And then you've got the thermite launcher. It forces a grand total of 6 re-rolls, so pretty much anything. I mean, you're gonna re-roll 6 armor saves. That's really hard to do without getting unlucky and falling apart, to be quite honest. Now, the downside to all 3 of these far more effective damage dealing weapons is the longest range for any of them is 16 inches. Most of them are less than that. The problem is Borz doesn't have the speed to close with the opponent so that these weapons become highly effective. It becomes an issue. This armory is hard to use because it plays against the biggest weakness we have, and that's the ability to move fast. That's the ability to get up the board. That's the ability to get into positions that are advantageous for us. And so it's hard to use the vast majority of this armory because it's just so short ranged, and the opponent can really effectively keep distance from us, and that creates a major issue when using the armory. Now, as far as strategy goes, I think there's 2 major ways you play Manticor Borz Group. I think 1, you choose to turtle up and you choose to play very defensive around your objectives. Obviously, this is scenario based. If you can kind of just sit back and force them to come to you, you've got good range with your guns, and you've got armor that, man, especially if you're sitting behind cover, they are not going to move you out. It's a great play style to use. The second play style, and this is maybe scenario dependent, is to play really, really aggressive, to go straight at your opponent, just kind of methodically pushing your forces forward. You don't need a lot of cover. We've got a lot of things that mitigate cover, whether it's our smoke ability, whether it's our thorax shields, whether it's trading ready tokens or our shield, all those different things. So you can be out in the open and it's totally fine because you're still gonna get covered and you still have high armor and things like that. We mitigate blast damage. It's just really hard to take these guys down. So those are your 2 main play styles where you really got to pick which one you want to go with, and you don't want to split them. You really want to decide what does the scenario need and how can I play this. Now, a couple other things to note that you can do with Manticor or to be aware of with Manticor. Number one, Manticor has a lot of bodies. We've got 9 guys with a lot of armor, which means it's kind of difficult to take our guys down. So a couple of things that we have to be aware of is, number one, Manticor Borz Group is built for late game. It's not built to win the game really early, especially against a good opponent. It's built to keep your guys alive and to kind of push forward or play super defensive and wear out your opponent's resources. Whereas if you're playing Harlow, you lose guys because you're forcing your opponent to make moves. You're using a guy as a trap tool, and that's fine. And you see a guy go down and you're going, well, that's fine because I wanted you to kind of go after this guy because I've got a trap set. If you're playing UN Alpha Raid Force, you just don't want to lose bodies, period. You got 6 of them. You do not want to lose bodies. If you're Manticor Borz Group, it's okay to lose bodies, but it's the way in which you lose them that matters. You need to make sure that if your guys are going down, it's because the enemy is pouring resources into them. If they need to use an armory in order to take down a grunt, that's a win for you. If they need to use an entire unit's firepower to take down 1 grunt, 1 specialist, that's fine. You just have to whittle down their resources. And because of things like our armory's short range, save yours up. Don't overextend your resources. Don't hope for a miracle shot. Move forward, and by the time you get into range, you've whittled down their resources and maintained your own, and you can win the game in the last turn or 2 because it's just exhausting playing against board. You're playing a game of attrition. Make every single model you have require a lot for your enemy to take down. Playstyle number 2, I would say, is we lack mobility, but a good thing to do is to kind of move so that you can close in or cage in a part of your enemy's forces. Slowly move forward, forcing them back, force them into a corner or a specific area, and just kind of slowly begin to tighten that noose around them until you finally have them, once again, in the end game. We're playing for end game when it comes to Manticor Borz Group. We're not trying to get out there and quickly eliminate everybody. We're trying to methodically go through it and win it through attrition. Now let's go ahead and talk list building. How do we want to build lists for Manticor? Obviously, different scenarios, different game types call for different amount of units. So let's look at, we're playing a scenario that only requires 2 units. Which 2 units do you take? I would say you take insertion team, you take Bratva team. Here's why. Smaller games, body count matters. The more models you have, honestly, the better board control you get, and it's a smaller game, and so that really does matter. But on top of that, we've got 2 4-man teams, each with armor 4. That's incredibly hard to take out. That is almost OP in those smaller game levels, especially you got smaller boards, so our lack of movement doesn't matter as much. You can do a lot with those 2 4-man teams. The Psychic team's amazing, but it's not nearly as great piloting it in a smaller game, especially if it's a game where you got 2 units and a handler. The handler does what Psychic team does, but better. So I would say that kind of really decides it for you. Is I would go with those 2 4-man teams in smaller games. Now, say you're doing a larger game and you want to stick with Manticor forces. You've already got your 1 group of each of the units. How do I want to build out more groups? This is where the Psychic team comes in. I would add multiple other Psychic teams. I would maybe go Psychic team, and then either a Bratva or insertion team instead of just another 1 of each, because it really is versatile. It's got multiple weapons, it's a single model, it's got a lot of abilities for sustainability. It's just really good. And then if you want to add Bratva team or insertion team, you ask yourself, do I want to play aggressive? If I do, I want to move up the board, I want to go after them, I want to play Bratva team. They're really good at that. The shield makes them very, very dependable. Being able to be in open spots, being able to give cover, that's really nice. Insertion team, if I want to play a more defensive style, because they've got good range, they've got a little bit more firepower, they can kind of make the enemy come to them and play it that way. And I think that works best. They can pin down multiple people, multiple units once they get close to them. I think they're just the better defensive style, which is odd because you think with the shield and the deployed gun, man, that's a defensive unit. I think they play a little bit more offensively in the way that Manticor Borz Group plays offense. Now, if you're looking at and adding handlers, here's what I'd say. Manticor Borz Group, there's not a bad handler to add to them. The cyber handler is probably the worst because they come with a data spike, obviously. You don't need another one, but it doesn't hurt, especially if you know there's gonna be a lot of E-War. Go ahead, that's not a bad one. The assault handler is good in every army. Every army we look at, you're gonna hear me say the assault handler because it's just versatile. He does a lot of things really well without focusing on anything in particular. The siege handler is built for Manticor. The model, you look at it, it's built for Manticor. The stat line, it's built for Manticor. It adds what they do. Sustainable, it can get on a point and control it. It's got firepower, which Manticor lacks, while having a massive amount of armor and great special rules. If you want to play defensive, add the marksman, because the marksman with his range, his skill, and the damage his gun does, you make it so that opponents can't just sit back. They can't just outweight you as well. They're gonna be forced to come forward because your range is gonna outrange them, and you can literally just whittle down their numbers and win that way from range. He's great if you're gonna play defensive. And then you've got the covert and you have the melee. And you may go, well, you know, this army's not really good at moving forward, so these guys aren't good. I actually think they're really good with Manticor, because they are guys that can move forward. You gotta be very careful with them because they're gonna kind of be out on their own. But the reality is you can get some really good situations where you're forcing your opponent to decide, do I invest resources to take out the handler that's threatening my front line, or do I invest the resources to take out kind of their own backline sitting on their objectives? Because it takes a lot of resources to take out either, and they can't do both most likely at the same time. So it gives you a lot more tactical ability, and it gives you much needed vertical mobility with the covert or the melee handlers. So I think handler wise, that works well. As far as other units, both Bannock and Sazbla are really good to add to them. They add kind of a good frontline option to screen your forces. They've got, both their specialists has some good firepower, which you need. This army lacks firepower. And quite frankly, if you're trying to mix and match forces, everything goes well with Manticor. And the reason everything goes well is because Manticor is the only defensive army, and they lack everything else. And so if you want to add Harlow, well, all of a sudden you've got speed, and that's a really good option to have speed and the defense. If you add UN Raid Force Alpha, oh man, all of a sudden you've got high skill, which is something Manticor lacked. You add UN 3rd Battalion, well, you've got a lot of offense and a lot of defense with Manticor and then 3rd Battalion. So they really mix and match well with everybody. And that's kind of how I would build out my Manticor list, and I hope that's helpful for you as you look to play scenarios and get games going, especially if you're looking to do it competitively. Once again, thank you guys for taking the time to listen to this. I hope it's helpful. I hope it's useful. I hope it gets you inspired to play more games of BLKOUT and dive deeper into this game. There's a lot out there to enjoy when it comes to the models, the lore, the gaming, all of it. We're going to continue to put out content like this, and we would appreciate if you drop this video a like, if you'd leave a comment giving us some of your thoughts, whether you agree, whether you disagree, what I miss, all types of things like that. Let us know what you want to hear and see in the future. And as always, until next time, I'll catch you guys later.